Hi. Every time someone is trying to justify tax cuts for the rich or corporations, they're going to come up with the same diagram over and over and over again. It's called the Laffer Curve. But this diagram isn't really based on data. It's not really based on research. It's literally drawn on a napkin at dinner. And that's something every American should know. So let's talk about why this pseudo-intellectual idea still shapes our economic realities today and what real evidence actually says. First, let's start with the man behind the diagram, Arthur Laffer. Art was an economist. He worked as an economic policy advisor for Ronald Reagan. And in the 70s, he went out and had dinner with Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Jude Lasinski. I hope I'm saying that last name right. And I'm not exactly sure what was discussed, but we know what was drawn. We know what was drawn because Smithsonian has a photo of the actual Laffer curve. You see, they were trying to find a way of talking about tax cuts for the rich that made sense. And at dinner, again, without referencing any data, the economists at the table drew the concept. That is as far as a Laffer curve goes. It is a concept. And let's look at a more modern interpretation of what this curve says. The concept is relatively straightforward. It says that government revenue has an optimal amount of tax rate. So at the extremes, if you have a 0% tax rate for everything, the government will receive no money. Likewise, on the other end of the extreme, Laffer suggests that if the government taxes 100% of everything, then there's no incentive for anyone to do anything. And the argument basically says that conservatives have been using for the last few decades, says, hey, we are somewhere on this curve, and we, the conservative viewpoint, think that we're on the right-hand side of this curve, that we're not optimal, that if you cut taxes, it will increase incentives for more people to make money, and therefore government revenue will keep growing. That's why if you look at every time they propose a tax cut for the richest among us and or corporations, the argument says that these tax cuts will pay for themselves. This concept may sound good in theory, but just remember, it is only a concept. So why do we keep using it? Well, it's a really easy story to tell. But here's the interesting thing. Since this became such a driving force, and I should know that it was the politicians at the table who were looking for a reason to give tax cuts in the first place. And so it sets up this interesting dynamic where these politicians take this pseudo-intellectual idea that's a concept drawn on a napkin at dinner, and they start to sell it. And it sells well. That triggers other economists to actually go study what is the best tax rate. We have well over 200 countries in the world that all have very incredibly different tax systems. It sets up this amazing natural experiment. And study after study after study, and there's multiple studies in most years, and I'll just throw up 2 on the screen for you to look at. But please go look at them for yourselves and go Google. There's other studies out there. They typically find that somewhere between 70 and 80% as a marginal tax rate for the highest earners is optimal. Let that sink in for a second. The conservative viewpoint argues that we are overtaxing the richest among us and preventing growth from happening. Yet all these actual economic studies that look at data and the results of growth, jobs, overall wealth, and yes, how well the wealthiest people are doing, ends up suggesting that somewhere between 70 to 80% is optimal, even if you buy into this idea in the first place. And you don't have to dive into the economic studies if you don't want to. You can also look at the countries in the world right now. The Nordic countries that have some of the highest marginal tax rates in the world also have some of the highest growth rates in the world. See, this whole concept, I think, is fundamentally flawed, but it's so powerful in our system because it's a great story to tell. So what do we do with this? Well, first, you have to understand what is our actual marginal tax rates for the wealthiest among us. You will see studies all over the map. The richest corporations in this country don't pay anything in federal income tax, but they may still pay state tax. The best studies I've seen is the top marginal tax rates for the wealthiest among us is somewhere between 50 and 30%. 15, and 30%. Far from the 70 to 80% range that the conservatives want you to believe that we're constraining growth. More so, look at your own lived experience. Every time that American people were sold tax cuts would pay for themselves, it has never ended up being true. The deficit just keeps growing. So next time you hear a politician talk about why we need to give tax cuts in order to increase growth, ask them about the reality behind the Laffer curve. Question the premise. See, if we're going to build a better future for all of us, we all have to get more engaged, more educated, and ask better questions and hold people in power accountable for the decisions they choose to make and the stories they choose to share. But in the meantime, you can help share this story by sharing this video, liking it, subscribing to this channel. And if you have questions about the Laffer curve or any other concept, that is really shaping our lived reality in politics, economics, or what it means to be an American? Throw the question down in the comments below. Thank you. If you haven't yet, please click like on this video, drop a comment below, and click that subscribe button. It'll help the YouTube algorithm make sure that these videos are getting into your feed. Thank you.